Hey, what's up? Welcome back to my channel. I have this on a little stick. It's not quite a selfie stick, but it's a handle, so I'm getting all fancy with the movement here. Hope I'm not making you sick. Anyway, today is October 18th. That means that we are in the midst of Inktober. This is a prime time for comic artists and illustrators all over the world. I mentioned in an earlier video this month that I started my own Inktober challenge. It's called 90s Comics-tober. Every day of the month we've been focusing on a particular character from the 90s that was relevant and popular or created in the 90s. Very 90s specific storylines and events. So it's day 18, which means I've made 18 drawings so far. And I thought in this video I would show you all of those drawings plus some of the process behind it. So this is going to be a little bit of a original art tour. I'm hoping to get this video up by later today, if not tomorrow. So depending on when you're watching this, it's either going to be today, the 18th, or tomorrow, the 19th. So I'll see you later or I'll see you tomorrow. Either way, let's get into it and I'll show you some of those drawings. Okay, so we'll just start with day one. Of course, we'll go in order here. Some of you might have already seen this piece just because a couple of weeks ago, I made a process video about the making of this piece here on my YouTube channel. I'll link it somewhere over here if you haven't seen it yet. But this was just done with a little bit of ink wash and then some more opaque ink on top of it. I should say, by the way, that the prompt for this day was Longhaired Superman. Every day there's a different prompt, and I feel like Longhaired Superman is one of the more quintessential visuals of 90s comics. It's, you know, Superman with the long hair / mullet, whatever you want to call it. I wanted to do something strong and classic Superman. I'm really happy actually with the way this pose came out. And then as far as process goes, I just drew the sketch for it on a separate sheet of paper. For the first bunch of these, you'll see this is sort of how I was working. I was doing a sketch on a separate sheet of paper. As the month, though, goes on, time becomes more and more of the essence. So now, the last few that I've done, I've kind of just been working them out straight on the board, which is a really great challenge in and of itself. But when I first started these, just to be safe, I was doing them on a separate sheet of paper to kind of work the idea out. And that really works really well for me, just in general, throughout my process. I enjoy working out all the difficult things about an idea on a separate sheet and then lightboxing. So day one, Longhaired Superman. Day two was Amalgam. That was the prompt. I'm not sure if any of you remember the Marvel and DC sort of crossover where certain characters were fighting other characters, and then I guess they fought so hard that they blended into one character. It was a big 90s event, and I was really into it when I was a kid. But after they had the Marvel meets DC miniseries, they started like an imprint called Amalgam, which was whatever characters were teamed up or fighting each other sort of just blended into one. So this is Amazon. She was a mix of Wonder Woman and Storm. I picked this character because I thought it would be cool to do some sort of like lightning and, you know, weather effect on the page. I also thought that her costume would translate really well in black and white with the white hair and the dark cape and the dark aspects of the costume. The most fun was definitely like this lightning effect. And again, this was done with wash and then just a bunch of brush pen and various pens on top. And then of course, the sketch was on a separate sheet of paper because this was still early on. And I was just working out the idea, the pose, and some of what I wanted to do in the background there. So sometimes it's really cool to see the difference between the sketch and the final. I always really love the sketches too. There's a certain kind of life and energy in those. Day three, Savageland Rogue. Anybody remember Savageland Rogue? She sort of became like an internet phenomenon. So for a character or a version of a character that only appeared very, very briefly in the comics, she's definitely lived on in many ways decades later. So you can see here, there's still a little bit of wash. Even the background is much darker, but it's still just a really dark wash. And then some really clean lines up front just to kind of make the figure pop. I'm really happy with the balance of black and white and some of the subtlety of the gray tones in this piece. Without having to do any kind of perspective, these are ways that you could create some sort of depth in your pieces. So then, of course, here is the sketch on the separate sheet of paper, just working out the composition and the pose. You can see here, I stayed pretty close to it. It's always nice to see in certain areas where I might have strayed and improvised on the final board, but this one stayed pretty true to the sketch. Okay, so this is then day 4. The prompt for day 4 was Mad Love. I don't know if any of you remember the Bruce Timm, I guess, origin story of Harley Quinn and the Joker's romance. But this piece for me was just sort of elaborating on a scene from the comics, something that never happened in the actual comic, but kind of just my interpretation of that scene. I'm really happy with this piece. A lot of black, very much obviously inspired by Bruce Timm's use of a lot of black. Here is the sketch, kind of just figuring out. You can see most of it is there. But I sort of just finessed the pose a little bit and tried my best to bring them to life as much as possible. It's a cool little moment. I really actually dig this piece a lot. Okay, day 5. The prompt for this day was Ben Reilly Spider-Man, also known as Scarlet Spider. This was part of the Clone Saga series in the 90s. It very much confused me back then, and in preparation for drawing this piece, I watched a couple of YouTube videos about the Clone Saga just to try and refamiliarize myself with it, and it confused me even more. And as far as the composition and the pose goes, I was really just going for something very, very Spider-Man and dynamic. This was a very challenging angle to make the whole thing work with the buildings and the figure. A lot of it was figured out here. This is where I did all the dirty work in terms of the perspective lines and just figuring out that pose and the composition in general. That's the cool thing sometimes about figuring stuff out on a separate sheet of paper. You could get it all messy and do all the dirty work, and then look at that. It looks like I'm a much better artist than I really am. Okay, I'm losing track of what day we're on, but the prompt for this day was Kingdom Come. Kingdom Come was a painted comic by Alex Ross, really beautifully done. I remember just being in awe of it when I was a kid. That one, and also Marvel's as well. For me, it really rooted these characters in reality and made it look as though they were real, living in the world that we were living in, as though this is what those characters would look like in real life. This was long before all of the movies, and in many ways I feel like it did a much better job at depicting real life versions of those characters than the movies do. In a lot of ways, the movies feel more like a comic book than Kingdom Come or Marvel's. But Kingdom Come is a futuristic story, and the introduction of Superman has him back on the farm in Smallville, having given up being a superhero, just working on his farm, getting back to his roots. And I always really liked that introduction, and I love the way those pages were painted by Alex Ross. So I wanted to kind of do a little bit of a tribute to that. And this was just my idea of what long-haired, older, bearded Superman might be doing on the farm. Here is the 2 sketches, actually. I had a little bit of a hard time getting this idea to work, but this was the original sketch. And then I actually sketched on top of it just to work out that figure a little bit. I wasn't crazy about the direction that he was going in, so kind of wanted to put him on his side a little bit more, just to show more of the figure. And I think it just worked better. So let's see, the actual order of this would go like this, to this, to that. So that's some of the process behind this Kingdom Come piece. It's funny how 18 days can feel like such a long time. All these earlier pieces, it feels like I did them so long ago. Every day you're kind of like really wrapped up in that day's particular drawing. And then once it's done, it's on to the next. So you're really moving very fast, and challenges like this really do keep you, I think, on your toes artistically, which is good. It's like a workout. This day's prompt was Deadpool, of course. This is only the second time I've actually drawn Deadpool. The first time was a few months ago when I made a video here on my channel where I recreated the cover of the first appearance of Deadpool by Rob Liefeld. That was a lot of fun. But this is the first time I'm drawing Deadpool on my own pose, and trying to do my best to do justice to the character. I must say, honestly, I never really connected with this character at all. I never really collected Deadpool comics growing up, and his design overall never really appealed to me. I always had a hard time sort of connecting with the character just because of the way his design was. But what do I know? He's one of the most famous superheroes currently, so it goes to show that my intuition as far as comic superhero costumes go is probably a little bit off. Here was the sketch for it. Pretty rough, actually. Just wanted to get the basic shapes in there. And from there, just kind of went in and blocked in some black areas. I like the chunkiness of the way this one came out. There's an immediacy and an energy to this one that I actually really like. This was fun. Deadpool. Maybe there will be more Deadpool drawings from me. More to come. We'll just have to see. Here's Tom Strong. Tom Strong just made the list. I had to look it up, but Tom Strong debuted in 1999, I believe. So just made the cut. I wanted to get him on the list just because I actually really like Tom Strong comics. He's a Alan Moore creation, came out of the whole like ABC line that Alan Moore started in conjunction with, I think, Wildstorm. But the Tom Strong comics, if you ever get your hands on them, are drawn just amazingly by Chris Sprouse. Some of the most, I think, underrated comic work. Really, really beautiful stuff. And his overall design, I think, is really cool. Kind of like a precursor in a lot of ways to Mr. Incredible. Very similar kind of build. A classic American superhero envisioned in many ways by British people. So it's kind of interesting. But I wanted to go for a strong, pun intended, pose, something powerful, and just kind of classic heroic pose. And this is the one I came up with, kind of happy with it. Here was the original sketch. Kind of like the blockiness and the angularity to this sketch, actually. Something that I don't think I really captured as much in the final. Things kind of rounded out a little bit. I'm happy with the final, but when I go back and look at this, I think that maybe it might be cool to redo it in some ways and go for a little bit more of that angular look that I was getting in that sketch. But this was a fun one with a lot of nice heavy blacks and bold brush strokes. Okay, Generation X, one of my favorite comic series when I actually was a kid. I think I was the actual target demo for this comic, and it really did appeal to me. It was drawn beautifully by Chris Bacalo, who's definitely one of my favorite mainstream comic book artists. And I tried to capture some of the playfulness that he would get across in his run on the series. And there's 7 characters on this piece, and I wanted to do my best to showcase all of them and their personalities. So this one was definitely a challenge compositionally, that's for sure. But for a piece like this, with as many characters on it as it has, working it out separately on a different sheet of paper really, really does help. This is what the sketch looked like. I think there's a lot of life in this sketch, and everything is pretty much there. Last minute, I added that gray background. Prior to that, it felt like it was just a little too empty. A part of me was going to maybe just add in the gray digitally just for myself. But I figured I wanted everything to be on the board with these pieces. So yeah, this is sketch and this is final. Okay, Death of Superman. This was a big event in the 90s, that's for sure. I remember Even the news was reporting about it. It was in the newspaper, everything. There's a scene in the comic that's drawn by Dan Jurgens that's very similar to this, and this is just sort of my interpretation of that scene where Lois is holding the dead, torn and tattered Superman. Kind of an emotional piece, and I wanted to ink it with a certain kind of energy and rawness to it. Here is the sketch. You can see in a lot of these sketches, I rule out the 6x9 area, and then I oftentimes draw way outside of it, just because I want to be able to move the sketch underneath the final, just to see compositionally where I want to lean it, and just have the option to move things around. Oftentimes, even in comic book panels, I like to draw outside of the border, even though those things are eventually going to be erased, just because it adds more life and I think more believability to a pose. By the way, I should say that all month these have been available on a first come, first served basis. And a bunch of these have already been sold. Some of them haven't. So if you're watching this and you see anything you like, feel free to reach out. Maybe the one that you like is still available. So if you're interested, I'll leave all my info in the description below. I've drawn many Mary Janes over the years. She's one of my more favorite characters to draw. I am very partial to the John Romita Sr. version of Mary Jane. I think that's just the most classic version and probably the most tasteful version as well. But there was a minute there in the 90s where Todd McFarlane, I think he was the one that sort of set the pace, kind of created a very different but specific version of Mary Jane. So the prompt for this day was actually Todd McFarlane Mary Jane. Big hair, short skirts, fishnets, that whole thing. So this was a pretty simple one with a pretty simple sketch. Just kind of sketched out that pose and then figured it all out on the board with the background and just balancing those black and whites. I wanted to keep this one clean and bold. I definitely wasn't going for a McFarlane look stylistically as far as like the lines that I was using, just his overall design of the character. These are much cleaner, smoother lines than McFarlane would have used back then. So Superman died in the 90s, but then he also got married after he came back to life. Would you look at that? The life of Superman is quite eventful, especially in the decade of the 90s. This one I actually didn't do any sketch for. I just did a little quick doodle digitally. I was trying to work out the idea that I had. I wanted to do something similar to that Mad Love piece where there's a lot of black in the composition. And I just had this idea of them floating off with maybe some hints of confetti in the sky. The challenging part of a drawing like this, it is so simple and there's so much black and the figures are so small that for me, it's really just a matter of making the figures feel natural and organic at that small size. But I think I captured what I was going for, and looking at it, I think it's a pretty cool piece. Madman. This is a silly one. Mike Allred's Madman was always a fun, very playful comic character, and I wanted to get that across in this particular piece. Obviously, he's just hanging out upside down. I kind of drew this back and forth. I kept just doing this every time I was drawing it, trying to get the feel for his pose. It's kind of hard drawing figures upside down because you might think that you would just draw it right side up and then flip it around, but it's the figure and the body and the anatomy does something when it's upside down. The head gets tucked in a certain way. The face looks a little different. Everything is in a different kind of perspective. So if you just draw him right side up and then flip him upside down, it just doesn't work. So there was a lot of just going back and forth with this piece, but it was actually really fun to work on. And this one also doesn't have a sketch. I did the doodle digitally as well, just really, really quick. And then after I did the line work, I just went in there with a little bit of gray marker just to bring the thing to life a little bit more. Okay, we're getting closer and closer to current day here. This, I forget what day this was, but this wasn't that long ago. This was Steel. Some of you might remember Steel. He sort of came about after Superman died, along with Superboy and other various Superman alternatives. They kind of needed some superheroes to fight crime, I guess, while Superman was dead. I don't think I've ever drawn Steel before, and so this was a lot of fun. And I got very expressionistic with this one, a little bit abstract. I was using big, bold brush strokes, trying to not get super detailed and tight with anything. I wanted to play around with some of that reflective effects, some wash, a little bit of gouache paint, some bold lines, some softer lines. I really didn't overthink this piece at all. Just kind of worked most of it out right on the board. The next prompt earlier this week was Marvel Knights. Marvel Knights was also late 90s, sort of just made the cut. But this was around the time where Joe Quesada started his own imprint in Marvel that was kind of like, I guess, Marvel's version of Vertigo comics. It was like a darker, a little bit more mature version of some of these classic characters. Joe Quesada was editor on that line. I think that was the precursor to him eventually becoming editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. But he also drew the Daredevil series within the Marvel Knights line. And in that series, written by Kevin Smith, Black Widow showed up, so I figured I would draw the two of them. She also had her own series within that Marvel Knights imprint. Wanted to keep it dark, inspired in some ways by the Quesada style, where he uses those really beautifully bold shadows. Definitely not afraid to light his figures very dramatically, and I really love that stuff. Okay, so we're almost there. This was just a few days ago. This was Superboy, another one that I worked out right on the board. Like I said, as the month has gone on, there hasn't been much time to do preliminary sketches for some of these. So I'm just figuring it out right there on the Bristol board, which is a lot of fun and I think allows for a very energetic final piece. This is classic 90s Superboy with the leather jacket, sunglasses not shown. I've actually drawn this version of Superboy quite a bit, and I have a lot of fun drawing this. This was a big comic of mine when I was a kid. I collected Superboy as well as the Robin series back in the 90s. Yesterday's was Age of Apocalypse. That was the prompt. I went for Age of Apocalypse Rogue. So I did Savageland Rogue and then Age of Apocalypse Rogue as well. I'm happy with the way the lighting in this one came out, actually. There's like a subtle wash there that really, I think, enhances the line art. And when in doubt, just add rubble, some smoke, and some fire, and you got yourself a superhero comic. And then today's day 18. This one is fresh, hot off the presses. This is She. She was like an independent, I guess, small press outside of the mainstream character created by Billy Tucci. Very successful in the 90s, crossed over many times with other bigger titles. But if you read Wizard like I did back in the 90s, you would have seen She ads everywhere. That's how I was mainly familiar with the character. This again was also done with wash and just some black ink. So cool, that's where I'm at so far with these. It's day 18 as of this recording. Tomorrow's prompt is gonna be Jean Grey and Cyclops get married. I don't know if you all remember that big X-Men event, but I'll be drawing that tomorrow. You could watch me on Instagram Live. That's where I often do a lot of these drawings. That's also where you could find the prompt list. And like I mentioned in the video, these are all available on a first come, first served basis for sale if you're interested in any of these. Some of these have already sold, but some of them are also still available. So if any of these jump out at you and you're interested, shoot me an email and we'll work something out. I hope you all enjoyed this video. This was fun to kind of show these off in chronological order. Feels like it's been a long month already. There's still a lot more to go. Actually, I think the second half of this month, the prompts are really great. The first half was great too, but I designed the list myself and I tried my best to do it in a way that was going to keep me engaged and excited as I went on. So it's working, evidently. And it's really cool to see all of you taking part in this challenge as well. I definitely don't want to be the only one doing this, so it's cool to see everyone else's version. I think we're all sort of keeping each other company and encouraging each other to keep going with all this. So anyway, I hope you dig this video. Thanks so much for watching. Information and all that kind of stuff is going to be in the description. Plenty more videos to come, maybe even a part 2 where I wrap up the rest of the drawings from this month. Let me know if you want to see something like that in the comments below. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.